The parents didn't linger. They never did when it mattered. Bags were set down carefully this time, not tossed the way they usually were. Instructions were repeated even though the children already knew them by heart. One hug lasted longer than necessary, awkward and unfinished, as if something wanted to be said but couldn't quite find the shape for words. You'll listen to him, Nola said, already stepping back toward the car. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a warning. It was a decision that had already been made, delivered calmly without explanation. The kids exchanged looks. They didn't see their grandfather often. Holidays sometimes, short visits that ended before they felt complete. He was polite in a way that made people lower their voices without realizing why. The door closed. The car disappeared down the street. Elias remained in the doorway longer than necessary, watching the quiet return. The sound of the engine faded. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Only then did he turn back inside. The children spread out instinctively, claiming familiar territory without discussion. Amir took the couch. Nia leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Ayo stayed standing, phone still in hand, eyes moving between screen and room. Imani sat on the floor, with her knees pulled close, watching everyone, as if she was trying to figure out what kind of house this was. Screens appeared, not in defiance, in reflex. You've grown, Elias said. No one answered. He smiled faintly, not offended. Come here for a minute. Amir moved first, curiosity winning out. Imani followed, small steps but steady focus. Nia didn't move. Ayo didn't move either, but his eyes sharpened. I want to tell you something, Elias said. Partial attention. Enough to continue. He waited. He always waited. Then, gently, without changing his tone, phones down for this part. A pause followed. You can pick them back up when I'm finished. Reluctantly, the devices were placed nearby. Not surrendered, just set aside, close enough to reclaim if necessary. Elias nodded once. This isn't a lesson, he said. It's just a story. He sat. It starts with a theft. It happened on a night no one thought mattered. No holiday, no ceremony, no reason to remember it later. London was doing what London always did, swallowing sound. Traffic hissed over wet streets. The Thames moved black and steady under bridges that had seen centuries come and go. Tourists had gone home, bars emptied. A late bus sighed to a stop and kept going. At the Tower of London, the last guided tour had ended hours earlier. The gates were locked. The cobbles were quiet. Inside, the Jewel House sat like a sealed thought, bright in the daytime, invisible at night. The crown jewels were supposed to be untouchable. That wasn't just security, it was belief. An entire country had rehearsed that belief until it became instinct. The people who planned the theft understood belief better than locks. They didn't begin with alarms. They began with people. They studied routine, not security, habit, not strength. They learned which guards had the same conversations at the same minutes, night after night. They learned which supervisor loved paperwork more than presence. They learned which corridor camera was always temporarily down, because no one ever asked why it was down. They learned the weight of keys, the sound of a lock that hadn't been oiled in years, the way a door settles when it closes. They built the heist the way you build a bridge, assuming the hardest part is what people can't see. They didn't rush. They didn't improvise. Planning took years, not because the act itself was complicated, but because timing was everything. Failure wasn't an option. Once the myth cracked, it could never be put back the same way. Keys were used. That detail confused investigators later. It still does, because keys suggest permission, and permission suggests trust. No glass shattered, no alarm screamed, no dramatic sprint through lasers, nothing that looked like a movie. The work was quieter than that. The work was human. A key turned, a door opened, a second door yielded the way it always had. The vault recognized the hand that held the key and behaved as it had been trained to behave. Nothing was broken, nothing was forced. When the vault closed again, it sounded exactly the way it always had. The same echo, the same finality, the same comfort of secure, except something was missing. Not everything, not even most things, just enough. A few pieces removed with care, items that would be noticed, but not immediately understood, objects that weren't merely valuable, but symbolic, the sort of thing that turns a private loss into a public wound. Like jewels? Imani asked quietly. Among other things, Elias said. By morning, the absence was noticed, not announced, not reported, noticed. At first, it was assumed to be an internal mistake, a misplaced inventory sheet, a logging error, something administrative, solvable, forgettable, because admitting what had happened meant admitting something worse, that history could be touched. Meetings were scheduled without agendas. Calls were made without records. Language bent itself into shapes meant to delay meaning. The same sentence appeared again and again in different rooms, in different languages. Let's not be hasty, because when power is embarrassed, it doesn't confess. It reorganizes. It delays. It waits for the world to get bored. For 3 days, London carried on. Headlines found other crises. Tourists lined up for other attractions. The tower still stood there, solid and serene, and no one outside the right rooms knew that inside, something sacred had been made absent. Inside the institutions, the conversation split in two. Before anyone outside the circle heard a word, the tower's administrators rehearsed their denial, the way actors rehearse a line. Not a lie, exactly. Something softer. They said, "We are reviewing inventory procedures." They said, "We have no indication of a security breach." They said, "There is no risk to the public." All true in the narrowest possible sense. No breach if you pretend keys are not accessed. No risk if you pretend history isn't a living thing. The statements were designed to close doors, not open facts. One group wanted to speak because silence makes rumors grow. Another group wanted silence because speaking makes responsibility real. In the end, silence won. Silence usually wins first. Then a package arrived, not at the tower, not in London, thousands of miles away. The delivery wasn't dramatic. No press conference, no announcement, no demand. Just a wooden crate placed carefully at the front steps of a museum in West Africa at an hour when staff were arriving and the city was waking. It was addressed simply in neat writing to a director who had spent a career asking for returns and receiving polite refusals, committees, delays, and careful letters that said, "Not at this time," as if time was the only thing missing. Inside was an artifact that had not touched its own soil for generations. A bronze head, heavy, calm, dignified, its surface dark with age and travel, the kind of object that had once sat in a royal court and then spent a century under European lighting, labeled with language that made theft sound like discovery. Beside it lay a single handwritten line. "This does not belong to us." "That doesn't make sense," Nia said. "That's why it worked," Elias replied. Confusion followed. Then argument. Governments debated ownership. Museums argued jurisdiction. Lawyers searched for precedent that didn't exist. Officials used old words like custodianship and heritage as shields. Public reaction came in waves. First disbelief, then dismissal, then unease. Some called it a stunt. Others called it theft disguised as morality. Commentators argued whether returning something undoes its original crime or merely rewrites it. News anchors spoke carefully, as if naming the artifact might obligate them to name the way it had been taken. Online, videos spread anyway. People filmed the crate with shaky hands. Elders stood still and quiet, as if sound might break what they were seeing. Younger staff members cried without understanding why they were crying. No one claimed credit. That part was intentional, because once credit is claimed, negotiation begins. This wasn't a negotiation. Within weeks, it happened again. Another crate, another country, always public, always precise. In Ethiopia, a sealed box appeared at a church office with an object wrapped as carefully as if it were still holy. The note was the same as the first, translated simply, returned intact. In Egypt, carved pieces arrived at a museum loading bay with no paperwork, only a list of catalog numbers that matched items recorded as lost a century earlier. In Ghana, a regalia piece surfaced that elders recognized instantly, not because it was famous to the world, but because it was famous to them. Each return forced the same question, sharper every time. If this could be returned, why hadn't it been before patterns were denied long after they were obvious? Maps were drawn and redrawn. Analysts debated symbolism versus provocation. Economists warned of precedent. Diplomats spoke of concern without defining it. No one could agree on motive, and that terrified them more than any motive would have. What were they trying to prove? Amir asked. Elias didn't answer immediately. Some people thought it was theft, he said at last. Others called it activism. Some called it terrorism. And what was it really? Io asked. Elias smiled faintly. That depends on when you're asking. The world tried to make it small. That's what institutions do when something challenges them. They shrink it with language. They turn it into a security incident, a political gesture, a complex dispute. But it wouldn't stay small, because the returns didn't stop at famous objects. They returned quiet things too. Tools, masks, letters, names, objects that weren't valuable to auction houses, but were priceless to families and communities, because they were proof that a story had existed before someone else rewrote it. And the person or group behind it never spoke. No manifesto, no video, no claims. Silence on purpose, because silence denied the world its favorite weapon, negotiation. And while institutions argued over legality, quiet things were happening elsewhere. This part didn't make the headlines at first, because it didn't look like rebellion. It looked like work. Ports expanded, not with grand ceremonies, but with contracts, concrete, and schedules. Roads were repaired, new ones were built, where old ones had been left to crumble. Warehouses appeared near rail lines. Fiber was laid. Logistics corridors took shape like veins, hidden under the skin, until suddenly you realized the body had grown stronger. No flags were raised. No speeches were given. No permissions were requested. Someone was building something patiently, deliberately, outside the language of approval. In the rooms where the powerful met, the fear changed. At first, it had been embarrassment, then anger, then confusion. Now it became something colder, because it wasn't just that objects were coming home. It was that decisions were moving with them. No leader could be sanctioned because no leader claimed it. No group could be arrested because no group declared itself. No enemy could be named because naming required certainty, and certainty required someone to step forward. No one stepped forward. Back in the house, Elias paused. The kids had been quiet longer than they realized. Nia's arms were no longer crossed. Amir's face held the tight concentration of someone assembling a puzzle. Io's phone remained on the table, untouched, his eyes fixed on Elias as if he were trying to see past him. Imani looked small and serious. So, they stole the crown jewels? She asked. Elias didn't correct her. Pieces, he said, enough to make a point. Why not just ask for the returns? Amir said. Why do all this? Elias looked at him for a long moment, then answered with a different question. Have you ever asked someone for something they took from you, he said, and watched them decide whether you deserved it? Amir didn't answer. Elias nodded, as if that was the answer. He leaned forward slightly now. What no one understood that night, he said, at the Tower in London, was that nothing had been stolen yet. Four faces lifted. Then what was it? Imani asked. Elias stood. That, he said, is where the story actually begins. He nodded toward the phones waiting nearby. Tomorrow,